The morning air over Owen Halbrook's farm carried the calm certainty of routine. It was the kind of calm that came from doing the same things every day for years, checking the irrigation drones, arguing with machinery that refused to cooperate, and occasionally reminding the local wildlife that his crops were not a free buffet. Owen liked that kind of life. It was simple, predictable, and most importantly, quiet. Quiet was important. He had spent 10 years working maintenance aboard freight vessels that jumped from star system to star system. Those ships had alarms for everything: temperature alarms, hull alarms, gravity fluctuation alarms, and once an alarm that went off because someone had accidentally dropped a sandwich into a ventilation fan. After enough years of that, Owen had decided the galaxy could keep its excitement. So he bought land on Meridia, a peaceful agricultural colony where the loudest thing in the sky most days was a cargo drone passing overhead. The twin suns were already lowering toward the horizon when Owen finished arguing with irrigation drone number 6. The drone hovered stubbornly above a wheat field, emitting a mechanical humming sound that Owen had come to interpret as passive-aggressive defiance. "You're supposed to water the north field," Owen said, pointing firmly. The drone rotated slowly, scanned the field, then sprayed water directly onto a large rock. Owen folded his arms. "That rock is not thirsty." The drone beeped politely and continued watering the rock. Owen sighed. "Every year I think about replacing you," he muttered. "And every year I decide it's cheaper to argue with you." At that moment, something bright flashed across the sky. Owen looked up. A small atmospheric shuttle streaked overhead, trailing sparks and smoke like a shooting star that had suddenly realized it had made a terrible mistake. The craft wobbled violently, dipped toward the hills beyond Owen's irrigation ridge, and vanished behind a cloud of dust. Owen watched the sky for a moment. "Well," he said slowly, "that seems unfortunate." He climbed onto his old utility rover and drove toward the ridge. The rover rattled across the uneven ground with the dignified sound of a machine that had technically retired 5 years ago, but refused to admit it. When Owen reached the ridge, he found the shuttle resting crookedly against a cluster of silver-grain plants that had clearly not volunteered to become landing cushions. Smoke drifted lazily from the rear engine, and beside the shuttle sat a woman. She looked mostly human. Her posture carried the tired patience of someone who had been dealing with malfunctioning technology for far too long. Her dark jacket was dust-covered, and strands of hair had escaped from whatever attempt she had made to tie it back. But what caught Owen's attention were her ears. They were long, elegant, and curved slightly upward. Subtle, but unmistakably alien. The woman looked up as Owen approached. For a moment they simply stared at each other. Then she gave a small, slightly embarrassed smile. "I was aiming for the open field," she said. Owen glanced at the wrecked shuttle. "You missed." "Yes," she admitted. "By quite a lot." She nodded. Navigation system decided gravity was optional. Owen walked slowly around the shuttle, examining the damaged engine housing. His years in ship maintenance immediately recognized the problem. "Fuel regulator fried," he said. "That was my guess too," the woman replied. Owen raised an eyebrow. "You fix ships often?" "No," she said calmly. "Mostly I just break them." That answer made Owen laugh. He crouched beside the engine and opened the access panel. "Well," he said, "you're lucky you crashed here." She tilted her head slightly. "Why?" "Because if you had landed 2 kilometers east," Owen said, "you'd be dealing with irrigation drone number 6. The woman looked confused. Owen pointed toward the distant field where the drone was still enthusiastically watering the same rock. "That machine has declared war on agriculture." She followed his gaze. Then she laughed. It was a genuine laugh, the kind that carried relief with it. "I'm Lissa," she said. "Owen," he replied. He studied the engine components carefully, then glanced up at her again. "You traveling alone?" Lissa nodded. "For now." Owen noticed the hesitation in her voice, but he didn't press the question. Years in space had taught him something important. People on the run often had complicated reasons. Instead, he grabbed a toolkit from the rover. "Well, Lissa," he said, "looks like your engine needs a few hours of work." She sighed. "I suspected that." Owen stood up and stretched his back. "You can stay at my farmhouse tonight," he said casually. "Better than sleeping next to a broken shuttle." Lisa looked genuinely surprised. "You're inviting a complete stranger into your home?" Owen shrugged. You crashed politely. She laughed again. Fair point. He glanced at the smoking engine once more. We'll fix it in the morning. Neither of them noticed the faint glimmer of distant satellites shifting in orbit far above the planet. Signals were already moving across military channels. Coordinates were being confirmed. And somewhere beyond the horizon, engines were beginning to warm for launch. Owen slept the kind of deep, stubborn sleep that came from a lifetime of waking early and working until his muscles forgot how to complain. The farmhouse was quiet except for the faint ticking of the environmental regulators and the distant humming of irrigation drones finishing their nightly cycles. Lissa, however, did not sleep nearly as well. She sat near the kitchen window long after Owen had gone to bed, staring out across the moonlit fields. The farm stretched wide and silent beneath the pale glow of Meridia's larger moon. From the distance came the occasional metallic clatter of machinery adjusting itself for the morning irrigation schedule. It was peaceful. Too peaceful. She had spent most of her life surrounded by strategy rooms, command decks, and the endless noise of military communication channels. Silence felt strange to her now, like standing in a room after someone had suddenly turned off the gravity. Still, she found herself smiling slightly. Owen Halbrook was unlike anyone she had met in years. Most people she encountered either saluted her or argued with her. Owen had done neither. He had simply handed her a wrench and complained about his irrigation drone. She suspected he had no idea who he had invited into his home. Lisa leaned back in the chair and closed her eyes. For a few hours, she allowed herself to believe she had truly disappeared. Morning arrived with the smell of something burning. Owen rushed into the kitchen holding a frying pan and a look of mild betrayal. I swear, he muttered, eggs used to cooperate more than this. Lissa watched him with quiet amusement. You're losing a battle with breakfast, she said. I'm losing a war, Owen corrected. The eggs in the pan had clearly surrendered long ago. He turned the stove off and looked at the ruined meal. Well, he said thoughtfully, on the positive side, this will probably terrify any bacteria. Lisa laughed. Need help? Please, Owen said immediately, handing her the pan like a soldier surrendering a weapon. Within minutes, Lissa had produced something that resembled actual food rather than an industrial accident. Owen stared at the plate in quiet admiration. You may have just saved my morning, he said. I've handled worse crises, she replied. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Outside, the first sunlight of the day spread slowly across the fields. Then the farmhouse windows began to vibrate. Owen frowned. That's strange. The vibration grew stronger. A distant thunder rolled across the sky. Lissa froze. She knew that sound. Owen stepped outside onto the porch, still holding a piece of toast. The sky above the farm was filling with ships. Huge armored transports descended through the clouds while smaller combat skimmers moved ahead of them in tight formation. The sunlight glinted off their hulls like shards of metal falling from orbit. Owen blinked slowly. He took a bite of toast. Then he looked back up again, just to confirm the ships were still there. They were. Well, he said quietly, that seems excessive. Behind him, Lisa stepped onto the porch. The moment the lead skimmer scanned the farmhouse, everything changed. Weapons deployed. Troops began dropping from the transports. Within seconds, armored soldiers surrounded the farm. Owen looked down at his toast. He considered the situation carefully. Then he took another bite. Did you accidentally park in a restricted zone? He asked Lissa. She did not answer immediately. Her expression had gone completely still. From one of the armored vehicles, a loudspeaker activated. A sharp voice echoed across the fields. Attention! This property is now under military authority. All occupants remain where you are. Owen leaned casually against the porch railing. That's new, he said. Lisa watched the soldiers forming a perimeter. Her shoulders tightened slightly. Owen noticed. You know these people? He asked. Lisa hesitated. Before she could answer, the loudspeaker spoke again. General Lissa Caney, step forward immediately. Owen turned slowly toward her. His brain paused, then restarted. He looked at the soldiers, then at Lissa, then back at the soldiers again. You said your name was Lisa, he said carefully. Yes. You did not mention the general part. Lisa rubbed the back of her neck awkwardly. It didn't seem important at the time. Owen stared at the dozens of armored soldiers surrounding his wheat field. Important, he repeated slowly, is a flexible word. One of the officers stepped forward, helmet reflecting the sunlight. General Caney, he called, you are ordered to surrender immediately. Owen whispered quietly to Lissa. Out of curiosity. Yes? Are they here because you crashed your shuttle into my crops? Lissa sighed softly. I wish it were that simple. Owen nodded thoughtfully. That means today is going to be complicated. From across the field, dozens of rifles aimed directly at the farmhouse. Owen looked down at the piece of toast still in his hand. He took one last bite. Well, he said, at least breakfast improved. The soldiers did not rush the farmhouse. They moved with the careful patience of people who expected danger but did not want to create it. Armored vehicles settled across the fields like metallic insects, their stabilizers digging into Owen's soil with quiet mechanical determination. Above them, two skimmers hovered in slow circles, their scanning arrays sweeping the farm again and again. Owen stood on the porch, hands resting casually on the wooden railing. He studied the soldiers the same way he usually studied broken machinery. He said quietly. Lissa glanced at him. What? They parked on my irrigation line. She blinked. Your irrigation line? Owen pointed toward the armored transport that had landed directly in the center of one of his watering grids. That pipe feeds the north field. Lissa looked at the vehicle. Then she looked back at Owen. An entire battalion is here to arrest me, she said. Yes. And you're worried about a pipe? Owen shrugged. I can deal with soldiers. You can? No, he admitted, but pipes are expensive. Lissa couldn't help laughing. Across the field, a squad of soldiers advanced cautiously toward the farmhouse. Their armor shimmered with defensive energy shields, and each one carried a compact plasma rifle. The officer leading them removed his helmet as he approached. He was older than Owen expected, with tired eyes and the posture of someone who had spent far too many years in command rooms. General Caney, he said. Lissa stepped forward slightly. Commander Reese. Owen glanced between them. You two know each other, he said. Rice ignored him. You've caused quite a situation, the commander said calmly. Lissa crossed her arms. I imagine headquarters is very upset. That's an understatement. The commander's eyes flicked briefly toward Owen. And the civilian? Owen raised a hand politely. Farmer, he said. Reese nodded. Mr. Halbrook. The commander tapped something on his wrist console. Owen Halbrook, agricultural contractor. No criminal history. Former freight maintenance engineer. Owen blinked. That's impressive. What is? You found all that out before I finished breakfast. Reese did not smile. This area is now under military authority. Owen looked out across his fields again. Yes, I noticed that part. Behind them, Lissa remained silent. The commander turned toward her. You are officially listed as absent without authorization, General. Your disappearance triggered a sector-wide search. Lissa's voice remained steady. I didn't disappear. You abandoned your command. I refused an order. The air between them tightened. Several soldiers shifted uneasily. Reyes spoke carefully. You understand the consequences of that decision. Lissa looked directly at him. Yes. Owen leaned against the porch frame. Forgive me, he said casually, but what kind of order requires this many guns? No one answered immediately. The commander studied him for a moment. This situation does not involve you, Mr. Halbrook. Owen nodded slowly. That's interesting. Why? Because all your soldiers are standing on my vegetables. Several of the nearby troops glanced down at the field beneath their boots. Rice exhaled quietly. General, he said, returning his attention to Lissa. Come with us peacefully. This does not need to become complicated. Lissa looked out across the farm. Dozens of armored soldiers, hovering skimmers, transport ships idling above the clouds. All of it for one person? You already made it complicated, she said. The commander's jaw tightened. Owen scratched his beard thoughtfully. So let me make sure I understand, he said. An entire military force arrived because she said no to something. Reese turned toward him again. This is a matter of command discipline. Owen tilted his head. That sounds like a polite way of saying someone important is embarrassed. One of the soldiers behind Rice coughed suddenly, trying to hide a laugh. The commander ignored it. "Mr. Halbrook," he said patiently, "you provided temporary shelter to a wanted officer. We appreciate your cooperation." "I didn't cooperate yet," Owen replied. "You allowed her to remain here." "I allowed her to sleep in the guest room," Owen corrected. "That room also contains a broken chair and a heater that occasionally insults people." Lisa smiled faintly. Rees studied Owen more carefully now. "You realize harboring a fugitive is a criminal offense." Owen nodded thoughtfully. "That seems inconvenient." "Yes. However," Owen continued, "I did not know she was a general." Lisa spoke quietly. "I didn't tell him." The commander considered this. "That simplifies matters." He gestured toward the soldiers. "General Caney will come with us." Lisa did not move. Owen leaned closer to her and whispered quietly, "Out of curiosity." "Yes? Did you do something terrible?" Lisa shook her head slowly. "No." "Did you refuse to do something terrible?" She hesitated. Then she nodded. Owen straightened. He looked out across the farm again. The soldiers, the vehicles, the skimmers, all of it suddenly seemed heavier. Reese noticed the shift in his posture. "Mr. Halbrook," the commander said carefully, "step aside." Owen looked down at the wooden porch beneath his boots. Then he looked back at the fields he had spent years building. He sighed. "Well," he muttered quietly, "this is going to ruin my entire morning." The morning sun climbed slowly above the silver-grain fields, lighting the farm in a calm golden glow that did absolutely nothing to improve the mood of the heavily armed soldiers standing everywhere. Owen remained on the porch, arms folded, studying the situation like a mechanic staring at an engine that had suddenly grown legs and started pointing weapons at him. Commander Reese waited patiently a few steps away, clearly hoping the farmer would eventually accept reality. Owen scratched his beard. "I just want to confirm something," he said. Rice exhaled slowly. "Yes? You brought an entire battalion." "Yes." "To arrest one person." "Yes." Owen looked at Lisa, then back at the commander. "You must really like her." A few of the nearby soldiers shifted awkwardly. One of them made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Reese ignored it. "General Kane is not a civilian traveler, Mr. Halbrook." "I noticed. She abandoned her command during a military operation." Lisa spoke calmly. "I refused an unlawful order." Reese's eyes hardened slightly. "That is not your decision to make." Owen raised a finger. "Actually," he said, "that sounds exactly like her decision to make." The commander stared at him. Owen gestured toward the farm. "Look, I'm not a general. I'm not even a particularly impressive farmer. Last year I lost a negotiation with a goat." Lisa glanced at him. "You had a goat?" "Briefly." "What happened?" "It won." Despite herself, Lisa smiled. Reese pinched the bridge of his nose. "This conversation is pointless." "Agreed," Owen said, "mostly because you're still standing on my irrigation line." The commander finally looked down at the ground beneath the armored transport behind him. "Move Vehicle 3, he ordered quietly over his wrist console. The massive vehicle shifted slightly, its stabilizers retracting with a hydraulic hiss as it lifted a meter into the air and repositioned itself. Owen nodded approvingly. "See? Now we're making progress." The tension around the farmhouse remained thick, but cracks of awkward humor had begun to slip through it. Lisa leaned quietly against the porch railing. "You really don't seem nervous," she said under her breath. Owen shrugged. "I used to work on cargo ships. That explains everything." "How?" "If you can survive cargo captains arguing about engine temperature for 6 hours," she said, "this probably feels peaceful." Owen nodded. "Exactly." Across the field, several officers gathered near a communications vehicle. Their voices rose and fell in heated discussion. Data screens glowed as new transmissions arrived from orbit. Reese watched them carefully. This situation was becoming complicated. He turned back toward Lisa. "You know why they sent me," he said quietly. Lisa's expression didn't change. "Because you're the only one who might listen first." The commander did not deny it. "High Command wants this resolved quickly." "I'm sure they do. Your refusal to execute orders has caused serious political problems." Lisa looked past him at the soldiers stationed along the farm's fence line. I refuse to massacre civilians. Alleged collaborators. Farmers, she said firmly. Owen raised his hand again. I feel like farmers are being unfairly represented in this conversation. Neither officer acknowledged him. Rees lowered his voice. You vanished instead of facing court-martial. Lisa's gaze hardened. Because the same command issuing the charges wrote the illegal order. Silence hung in the air. Owen looked between them. So, he said slowly, this isn't just about discipline. Rees glanced at him. No, it's about who tells the story. Neither of them answered. The distant rumble of another approaching shuttle rolled across the sky. Several soldiers turned their helmets upward. Owen followed their gaze. Please tell me that's not another army. Lisa squinted at the incoming craft. No, she said quietly. Worse. The shuttle descended quickly, landing near the armored vehicles with sharp precision. Its hull bore the silver crest of the Colonial Administrative Council. Rice muttered under his breath. Politics. The shuttle door opened, and two officials stepped out wearing formal uniforms that looked entirely unsuited for standing in the middle of a wheat field. Owen sighed. Ah, he said, now we have bureaucrats. Lisa smiled faintly. The most dangerous species in the galaxy. Reese watched the officials approach. You understand what this means, he said to Lisa. Yes. This is no longer just a military matter. It never was. The officials reached the edge of the farmhouse yard. One of them activated a handheld recorder. General Lysa Caney, he announced, your presence here has triggered a formal inquiry regarding the events on Arden Colony. Owen leaned toward Lisa. Is that the place with the illegal order? Yes. He nodded thoughtfully. Well, Owen said quietly, this is going to be a very long morning. Lisa glanced at the growing crowd of soldiers, officers, and political officials now surrounding the farm. Then she looked at Owen. You still have time to step away from this. Owen looked out across his fields once more. The wheat swayed gently in the wind. His irrigation drone hovered nearby, still watering the same rock. He sighed. I was planning to spend today fixing that pipe, he said. Lisa waited. Owen folded his arms again. But apparently, he added, today we're overthrowing military politics instead. The field around Owen's farmhouse no longer looked like farmland. It looked like a temporary government headquarters that had accidentally landed on top of wheat. Armored vehicles stood in careful rows, skimmers floated above the crops, and several portable communication towers had been deployed in the space where Owen normally parked his tractor. Thin beams of scanning light swept the ground as military sensors checked for threats that Owen suspected did not exist anywhere within 300 kilometers. Owen leaned against the porch railing and observed the entire situation with the quiet patience of a man who had accepted that his morning schedule had completely collapsed. You know, he said thoughtfully, when I bought this farm, nobody mentioned surprise battalions. Lisa stood beside him, arms folded, watching the officials who had arrived from orbit. They probably assumed it was obvious. Ah, Owen said, a common farming hazard. Several soldiers nearby pretended not to hear him. The two council officials now stood in the center of the yard with Commander Rice. A holographic display floated between them, projecting rotating data streams and mission records into the air. The taller official spoke first. General Caney's refusal of Command Directive 17 is now under formal review. Owen raised an eyebrow. Directive 17 sounds suspiciously like something nobody wanted to explain properly, Lisa murmured quietly. It was an order to destroy a settlement on Arden Colony. Owen nodded slowly. Yes, that does sound like something they'd number instead of describe. Across the yard, the conversation between the officials and Commander Rice grew more intense. Rice pointed toward the holographic display. The order was issued under emergency wartime authority. The second official responded sharply. Emergency authority does not override interplanetary civilian protection statutes. Owen leaned closer to Lisa. They sound like two repair technicians arguing about who broke the engine. That's not far from the truth, she replied. The officials turned toward Lisa. General Kane, the taller one said, you are accused of abandoning your command. Lisa stepped forward slightly. I refuse to execute an unlawful attack. The official tapped a control on the holographic display. New information appeared in the air. Satellite images, troop movements, communication logs. You disappeared immediately afterward. I withdrew my fleet, Lisa said calmly, without authorization, without committing a massacre. Silence hung in the yard for several seconds. Even some of the soldiers seemed uncomfortable. Owen scratched his beard again. I feel like there's a simple solution here. All three officials turned toward him. Commander Rice looked tired already. What solution would that be, Mr. Halbrook? Owen gestured toward the floating holographic data. Well, if she refused to destroy civilians, that sounds like the correct decision. The taller official frowned slightly. It is not that simple. It never is, Owen agreed. But from a farmer's perspective, destroying innocent people usually falls under the category of bad idea. A young soldier nearby coughed into his helmet. Lisa smiled faintly. The official cleared his throat. This situation involves strategic military considerations. Owen nodded thoughtfully. Yes, those are the things that always make terrible decisions sound official. Commander Rees glanced sideways at him. You are remarkably comfortable speaking to military authorities this way. Owen shrugged. I once had a cargo captain try to arrest an engine for refusing to start. That's not comparable. It felt comparable at the time. The second official adjusted his console. General Caney, why did you flee instead of reporting the order through proper channels? Lisa's voice grew quieter. Because the proper channels were the ones that issued it. That answer stopped the discussion again. The wind moved softly through the fields. One of Owen's drones drifted overhead, scanning the soldiers with mild electronic curiosity. The machine paused above an armored transport and sprayed water onto it. The soldiers jumped back. Owen waved lazily toward the drone. Don't mind him, he called out. He thinks everything is a plant. Lisa covered her mouth, laughing. Commander Rees finally rubbed his temples. This situation is becoming absurd. Owen looked around at the tanks, soldiers, hovering aircraft, political investigators, and agricultural equipment. Commander, he said gently, this situation passed absurd about 2 hours ago. The taller official turned to Lisa again. If your claim about Directive 17 is accurate, it could trigger a tribunal. It will, she replied. And if it isn't? Lisa met his gaze steadily. Then you can arrest me. Owen leaned closer to her. Out of curiosity, he whispered. Yes? How confident are you that you're right? Lisa smiled slightly. Completely. Owen nodded. That's reassuring. From across the field, a new transmission signal arrived at the communication tower. Several officers rushed toward the console as fresh data streamed across their screens. Commander Rees watched their reaction carefully. Something had just changed. One of the officers looked up suddenly. Commander, Orbital Command is requesting immediate verification. Verification of what? The officer turned the screen toward him. Satellite images appeared above the console. Images of Arden Colony, civilian settlements, unarmed farming communities, and military targeting grids that had been drawn across them. The officer spoke quietly. The directive, it's real. Silence spread across the entire field. Lisa said nothing. Owen looked at the floating images. Then he looked at the soldiers surrounding his farm. Well, he said slowly, that seems like the kind of paperwork that ruins a lot of careers. The floating holographic images above the command console glowed faintly in the morning light. Satellite scans of Arden Colony rotated slowly in the air, revealing clusters of farms, small habitation domes, irrigation lines, and energy towers that looked strangely similar to the systems Owen used on his own land. Except these had targeting grids drawn over them. No one spoke for several long seconds. The wind moved quietly through Owen's fields, bending the silver grain in soft waves that seemed completely uninterested in the political disaster unfolding beside them. Owen leaned forward slightly and squinted at the holographic projection. Huh, he said. Commander Rees didn't respond immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the data feed. The officer at the console cleared his throat. Commander, Orbital Command confirms the directive was authorized under emergency protocol. Rees spoke slowly. Emergency protocol does not authorize civilian extermination. The officer hesitated. It appears someone reclassified the colony as a hostile supply hub. Lisa's voice cut through the silence. Because it was politically convenient. The two council officials exchanged tense glances. One of them adjusted his recorder. These records will trigger a full tribunal review. Owen raised his hand politely. Excuse me. Everyone looked at him. I'm just a farmer, he said, but that sounds like someone tried to solve a political problem by blowing up people who grow vegetables. No one disagreed. Owen nodded thoughtfully. Yes, that tends to be frowned upon. Nearby, several soldiers shifted their weight awkwardly. A few of them were now staring at the images of Arden Colony, with expressions that suggested they were reconsidering several things about their orders. Commander Rees finally looked at Lissa again. You knew this evidence existed. Yes, and you chose to disappear rather than present it. Lisa shook her head. I tried. Rees frowned. Tried? The report was blocked before it reached the council. The two officials stiffened. Blocked by whom? One asked. Lissa shrugged slightly. The same people who issued Directive 17. Owen leaned toward her and whispered quietly, So, powerful people with very expensive chairs. Exactly, she murmured. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the wheat fields. Above them, the skimmers continued their slow patrol patterns. But the pilots inside were clearly listening to every word. The taller council official spoke again. If the directive was falsified to justify civilian destruction, then several admirals are about to have extremely uncomfortable meetings. Owen finished helpfully. The official blinked. Yes. Owen nodded. I've seen that happen before. Rees looked at him. You have? Cargo shipping contracts, Owen explained. Same principle. Fewer war crimes. Lisa laughed softly. The tension in the yard shifted again. It was no longer the tension of soldiers preparing to arrest someone. Now it felt more like a group of people slowly realizing they had walked into a political minefield. Commander Rice folded his arms. General Kane, Lissa met his gaze. You abandoned your fleet. I withdrew it. Without orders. Without killing civilians. The commander studied her carefully. For the first time since arriving at the farm, he looked uncertain. Owen leaned against the porch railing. Commander, he said casually. Rees glanced at him. Yes. You seem like a reasonable person. That depends who you ask. Fair point, Owen admitted. But let's say someone gave you an order to burn down my farm. Rees said nothing. And let's say, Owen continued, you knew the order was illegal. Still silence. Would you follow it? The commander looked out across the quiet fields, at the irrigation drones, at the farmhouse, at the crops swaying gently in the wind. No, he said finally. Owen nodded. Exactly. Several soldiers nearby quietly relaxed their posture. The council official checked his console again. Orbital Command is requesting clarification. Rees spoke calmly. Clarification of what? Whether General Caney is now under arrest. The commander looked at Lissa. Then he looked at the floating satellite images of Arden Colony again. The targeting grids, the civilian farms, the falsified threat reports. He exhaled slowly. Owen watched him with interest. Commander, he said quietly, I'm not trying to influence your decision. That's reassuring. But if it helps, Owen added, I've found that arresting the person who refused to commit a war crime is usually bad for morale. One of the soldiers behind Rees made a choking sound inside his helmet. Lissa smiled again. Commander Rees rubbed his forehead. This farm has become the most exhausting location on this planet. Owen shrugged. I try to keep things interesting. Another transmission signal arrived at the communications tower. An officer looked up sharply. Commander. Yes? High Command is demanding immediate action. Rice sighed. Of course they are. The officer hesitated. They specifically ordered the arrest of General Kane. The commander remained very still. Owen watched him carefully. So, Owen said gently, now comes the complicated part. Rees glanced sideways at him. What complicated part? The part where you decide, Owen replied, which order you're going to refuse. Commander Rees stood motionless for several seconds after the transmission arrived. The small communication tower hummed quietly beside the vehicles, its antenna blinking as messages moved back and forth between orbit and the ground. Around the farm, soldiers waited. They were trained to react quickly to orders, yet no one moved. The satellite images of Arden Colony still hovered above the console, glowing faintly in the morning light like silent witnesses. Owen leaned against the porch railing and watched the commander carefully. "Well," he said after a moment, "I've had mornings that went badly, but this one is definitely in the top 5. Lissa folded her arms beside him. "You're handling it remarkably well. I once spent 3 hours stuck inside an airlock with a malfunctioning cargo robot," Owen said. "After that, everything else feels manageable." Commander Reese finally looked up. His voice was calm, but something about it had changed. "Officer," he said quietly to the communications console, "respond to orbital command." "Yes, sir." "Tell them the situation is under review." The officer hesitated. "Sir, the order was explicit." "I am aware." The officer waited. Reese continued. "Tell them I will not proceed with an arrest until the legality of Directive 17 is confirmed." The officer stared at him. "That may be considered refusal of command." Reyes shrugged slightly. "Yes." Owen nodded approvingly. "See? You're learning." Lissa glanced at him. "Learning what?" "That sometimes the correct answer is no." Across the yard, several soldiers visibly relaxed. The council officials exchanged quick looks and began speaking urgently into their recorders. Data began streaming back toward orbit, carrying the images of Arden Colony and the confirmation that the directive had been real. The political storm that followed arrived faster than any warship. Within an hour, new transmissions flooded the communication tower. Admirals argued over encrypted channels. Legal investigators demanded access to the records. 3 different departments attempted to claim authority over the situation. Owen watched the chaos unfold with quiet fascination. "Remarkable," he said. "What is?" Lissa asked. "You disappeared for a few weeks and apparently broke the entire military." She smiled faintly. "It was already broken." Another shuttle descended from orbit, this one bearing the insignia of the Interplanetary Oversight Tribunal. Its arrival sent a ripple through the soldiers stationed around the farm. When the officials stepped out, their uniforms carried the unmistakable authority of investigators who answered to no military command. Commander Reese greeted them with visible relief. Within minutes, the investigators reviewed the evidence. The targeting grids, the falsified threat assessments, the blocked reports Lissa had tried to submit. The lead investigator finally turned toward Lissa. "General Kane," she said calmly, "your refusal of Directive 17 is hereby recognized as lawful." The words hung in the air. Lissa did not react immediately. "Additionally," the investigator continued, "the officers responsible for issuing the directive have been placed under formal investigation." Owen let out a slow whistle. "That sounds expensive." Several soldiers nearby laughed quietly. Commander Rice removed his gloves and looked at Lissa again. "I suppose this means you are no longer a fugitive." Lissa tilted her head slightly. "I suppose it does." The commander gave a tired smile. "You could have saved me a great deal of trouble by explaining this earlier." Lissa shrugged. "Would you have believed me?" Reese considered that. "Probably not." The investigators began coordinating with the council officials. Soldiers started dismantling the temporary command equipment scattered across Owen's fields. Vehicles lifted off. Skimmers powered down. The battalion slowly withdrew. Owen watched them go with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had just regained possession of his farm. Lissa stood beside him. "You know," she said softly, "you could have turned me in immediately." Owen shrugged. "You look like someone who needed help. That's a dangerous habit." "Farming," Owen replied, "is basically helping things grow and hoping nothing terrible happens." She laughed. The last transport ship lifted into the sky, leaving the fields quiet once again. The wind moved gently through the crops. Owen's irrigation drone floated past them, paused over the same rock it had been watering all morning, and sprayed it again. Lissa watched the machine. "That rock must be very hydrated." Owen sighed. "We have an understanding." The investigator approached them one last time. "General Caney," she said, "you are requested to return to command." Lissa looked out across the peaceful farmland, the quiet, the open sky. Then she looked at Owen. "I will," she said slowly, "but not today." The investigator nodded and returned to the shuttle. Soon the sky was empty again. Only the farmhouse, the wheat fields, and the quiet hum of farm machinery remained. Owen stretched his back and walked toward the irrigation ridge. Well, he said, I should probably fix that pipe now. Lisa followed him. You just helped expose an illegal military operation. Yes. And saved an entire colony. Yes. Owen picked up his toolbox. And yet, he said, my irrigation system is still broken. Lisa laughed. Need help? Owen handed her a wrench. You're good with broken things, right? She smiled. Apparently.